911 dispatchers of Reddit, what are some of the most disturbing calls that you've received? So, I've heard a lot of people die on the line, but never like this. I took a call from an old man who said 3 guys with guns were trying to kick in his front door. He told me he had a shotgun and was asking me if he could shoot them if they were able to get inside. At the time, our state did not have a castle doctrine, which lets you use lethal force to defend your home from invaders. Our peace-loving hippie of a governor had shot down several attempts to get this law into place. It pissed me off even more because I already hated this guy during his campaign for governor because some a-hole kept putting Lynch '04 signs on my lawn. I actually set up camera systems to catch the guy that was doing it. Turns out, it was my neighbor across the street. I was going to confront him, but he was never home. When I was, probably out littering the city with signs. So, I decided it would be best to just smash his mailbox. 3 separate times. It was a blast. I think I might go do it again later because F him.
So this story went about the guy defending himself with a shotgun and then just kind of veered off into Lynch 2004 in his campaign in whatever place. Sometimes you gotta vent, I guess. Anyway, next story.
So, I'm on the field side of this, paramedic, and here is my most disturbing call. Got a call for a traffic accident on the 5 freeway in California. We get there, and there is a mutilated body laying in the road. As I approached the body, I realized it was a child. Looking at him, I knew there was nothing we could do. His skull was concaved and his chest was crushed from being run over by a semi-truck. Apparently, he was driving in a car with his uncle, which broke down on the freeway. He tried to get out in the middle lane on the freeway and was ran over by a semi-truck. I initiated CPR because of how young he was. The fire department showed up and I heard one of the firemen say, "If we leave him here, CHP will be pissed because they'll have to shut down the whole freeway, so we better take him in." And even though I knew there wasn't anything I could do, I still worked him up the entire way to the hospital. Every time I did a chest compression, blood and brain matter would come gushing out of his ear. It was hard to get a seal around his mouth because his jaw was halfway ripped off of his face, and he had a single tooth that was halfway hanging out of his mouth that was only held on by his braces. We arrived at the hospital and the firefighter stopped pushing meds and stopped trying to shock him. He casually got out of the ambulance and told the nurses that the kid was done. He told me I didn't have to keep doing chest compressions, but I didn't listen. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop, even though I knew there was absolutely no way he was coming back. We pushed him inside and the doctors and nurses gave a brief effort of trying to bring him back. I remember standing there in the hallway, watching them work the kid up while my pager was blowing up from my dispatch, asking what our ETA was to get back into the field. Finally, I heard the doctor ask for the time of death. Then, as I was cleaning this poor child's blood and brain matter off the floor of the ambulance, I saw the boy's parents show up at the back door. The mother had a slight look of concern on her face, but I could tell that she didn't know the severity of what had happened to her son. I walked back inside to throw away the blood-stained sheets when I heard the doctor break the news to the mother. And there is no sound in the world that is harder to hear than the sound of a mother who has just been informed that she lost her child. The mother lashed out at the father and screamed that it was his fault. The mother had to be restrained by hospital staff and sedated. I spoke with the father, who seemed to be in a state of shock and disbelief. Apparently, he and the boy's mother had been divorced for years, and he said that he hadn't seen the boy for months because he failed to pay child support. He said that he couldn't remember the last time he told his son that he loved him, and he said he would do anything to have a chance to tell him how proud he was of him. And sorry for the format of that story, I just typed it up in a rush, but that was by far the most difficult call that I ever had, and it definitely scared me for life. I still think about that boy's father to this day, and when I do, it always reminds me to never hold anything back. I always tell my friends and family how much I love them and how I feel about them now, because you never know when your day will come. Next story. I'm only going to leave one because it's one that really got to me. After only working there 3 months, I took a call from a trucker who had wrecked on the interstate and was flipped on his side. He was pinned by the steering column and the lower part of his body was crushed, like Mel Gibson's wife in the movie Signs. Usually when a wreck happens on the interstate, we get bombarded with calls from everyone passing the vehicle. I happened to receive that call from the man himself. He was awake and told me who he was, who he worked for, and that he must have dozed off for a second. He told me that he was pinned in and that the bottom part of his body was numb. He told me where he was from and about his family. At this point, I was making small talk to keep him calm, and he started talking about God and asked me to pray with him. He led the prayer, asking for help and for God's will to be done. I kept him on the line while responders traveled to the scene. As a little time went by, he started to slur his speech, and he wasn't comprehending my questions anymore. My guess is that he was slowly bleeding out, and his level of consciousness was lowering. Eventually, he stopped answering my questions at all. He had passed out. Very shortly after, responders arrived and extradited him out of the vehicle. As soon as the pressure from the steering column was released, he bled out, dying almost instantly. Medics told me that if a team of the best doctors in the world were 20 feet away, they would not have been able to save him. I was pretty much the last person to talk to this man alive, and in my eyes, I made friends with him. Being a dispatcher, you are the last person to talk to people all the time, but usually it's a wanting to self-unalive person or an older person, not an innocent man trying to make a living for his family. That still sticks with me. I've taken worse calls, heard some bad stuff, but I've never felt a personal connection with any of them like I did with that trucker. Next story. My worst one actually came in on a non-emergency line. Dispatch, can I help you? Yeah, I'm on the highway. I just got in an accident. I ran over a motorcyclist and, I think he's dead. And the guy was so calm, but you could hear him about to break down. The call was right at the end of my shift, and I had to pass the accident on my way home. The body was still lying in the middle of the road. Next story. I've been lucky so far. A colleague answered a call from a woman who had run over her husband in a speedboat and chopped off his legs. Their children were there with her in the boat. It was the husband's 40th birthday, and he wanted to go water skiing. She hadn't wanted to because she wasn't comfortable driving the boat. He died. Next story. Worked as a police dispatcher / 911 call taker for a while. There are many different types of disturbing calls, such as mentally disturbed people versus calls that leave you shaking afterwards. My most terrifying call was from a guy who was on the verge of taking his own life. I actually don't mind those type of calls because the calls are usually made by friends, family, or after the fact, so you can usually get information and send out the call. However, in this case, the actual guy called up. He was extremely high or drunk, sobbing uncontrollably, heavy emphasis, was using an old deactivated cell phone, so I could only find the general area of where he was calling from, had a knife to his throat, and was on the roof of a high-rise. And I could not get through with him because he was out of his mind and refused to tell me where he was while crying the whole time. I was on the phone with him for 10 minutes trying to figure out where he was and using everything I had in my arsenal to get through to him, but it didn't work. During all of this time, I was only able to get his name. He hung up, but 10 minutes later, he called back and I got him again. For the next 20 minutes, it was the same unresponsive threats to take his own life. But I pinged his cell and saw that he was very nearby some apartment complexes, and I said F it, and sent cruisers to every apartment complex in the area and told them to find a guy crying with a knife. I was on the phone with this guy for about 20 more minutes while the cops searched the area and finally found him hiding under a staircase in an apartment complex with a knife. Found out later they shipped him to a hospital and that he was effed up on something. I was shaking afterwards, and my next call was from a tow guy, and I could barely type. But some of the most disturbing calls, though, were from mentally disturbed people. We had a department policy of just listening to them until they are done talking, unless you feel that they are a threat to someone. The annoying thing is that they seem perfectly normal until they slip up and give you one detail that lets you know they're nuts. Like, yeah, I want to report a burglary. Then they give you details and say, can you only bring the cops who aren't aliens? Stories like these range from, Sylvester Stallone lives in my holes, pores, so I bought super glue and covered my body. Or, FBI is controlling my mind with hats. I told her to call the FBI. We had an unofficial policy of trying to pawn off crazies to other departments or the FBI so they can deal with them. Funny thing is, those agencies do the same to us. Had somebody else say his lobster is SAing me. Can't actually see the lobster though, but I could smell it. Then somebody said microwaves are making me beat my son. My most disturbing one, a caller said to me, my children are being abused by my parents. I can hear them screaming. They are being SA'd. Then I say, where are the children now? At my parents' house? Where are you? At my house. So you can hear them, and what do they look like? With my mind. I don't know what they look like, but they are shapeshifters and like brown blobs. She went on later about the sniper who lives in her attic and the tiny man who lives in her brain. Next story. At EMT training, we listened to a recording of a real 911 call. It was of a woman talking about her ex-husband going crazy and tearing up the house. Then she made a very short gasping sound and went quiet for a second. After that, she started saying not to send the police and that he had left. Her voice was now very strange and monotone. The dispatcher told her that if she really didn't want the police to say everything is fine. If she said, don't send the police, he would send them there immediately. She said, please don't send the police. And the police got there in time. So they were able to find out that the moment she gasped was the instant the husband put a gun to her head. Next story. Not a call, but I was an EMT trainee, and this is what made me decide not to go ahead. I had a crap ton of terrible wrecks, and even though I made it through a couple of SA calls and a bad ATV accident with an 11-year-old kid, but when I got called in for a burn and it was a 9-month-old baby, I lost Boston. The kid was covered in boil burns, 3rd and 2nd degree all along its legs. The mom said it had tipped over a pot of boiling water and that's why it was burnt, but there was no spatter. My trainer looked at me and said, "Dipped baby," and then went back to work. The cops took her in and we took this poor kid to the hospital with a very bad prognosis. Later, my whole team was called in to sit with a counselor. It turns out the woman had dipped her child in boiling water because she wouldn't stop screaming. And this happens often enough in the South that they term it dipped baby. I knew I was done. Took my hours of counseling and got the hell out of that field. Next story. Not a dispatcher or EMT, but sharing my experience with an EMT. My daughter stopped breathing at 5 days old. I managed to resuscitate her, but she was still pretty blue when the EMTs arrived. There was a wonderful woman EMT who responded. I remember she had the most beautiful dark skin, amazingly long hair, and incredible fingernails, short but well manicured. It's weird what you remember in times of stress. She rode with me and my daughter in the ambulance to the hospital and took such good care of her. Fast forward a couple of weeks, my child stops breathing again on a walk with her father. EMTs are dispatched. I get a call to meet them at the hospital. I arrive at emergency and see many people, including this amazing woman working on my daughter. I knew in that instance my child was dead, and I lost it horribly. Later, after time of death was called, we were allowed to spend time with our child. As I was sitting in the room with her body, stunned beyond all comprehension, this amazing woman comes into the room. She could have left by then. It had been at least 30 minutes since time of death, but she crouched down beside me, put her arms around me, and cried. She told me how she worked so hard to save my baby, how she felt responsible for not being able to do so, and that she remembers the first call and was devastated when she realized it was the same baby on the second call. She stayed and talked to me for a good 10 minutes. I don't know her name. I don't know how to find her. This was 12 years ago, but I've always hoped and prayed that amazing woman with the beautiful skin, hair, and nails is okay, and stopped blaming herself for my child's death. I can't imagine doing what she does for a living, but all I know, as hard as it was, her amazing presence made that horrible moment of my life the tiniest bit more bearable. Thank you, 911 dispatchers and first responders. Even when you can't save a life, you make a positive difference to so many. Next story. Long story short, I transcribed 911 calls for examples to use when training dispatchers. The one I'll always remember was about a couple in their early 50s who were known as regular callers due to their physical fighting and self-unaliving thoughts during their drinking nights. One night, the wife calls in with slurred speech telling the operator that her husband is in the corner of the kitchen in a chair with a shotgun. In the background, you can hear the man verbally harassing the woman on the phone, telling her that she's a B-word, an idiot, that she ruined his life. The wife, though, just keeps telling him to shut up and tells the operator that he pushed her into a wall earlier that left a hole in the drywall. She wants him to spend a night in jail to sleep it off because now he's carrying the shotgun around and worried he'll F things up in the neighborhood, she said. There is a sound of struggle and then a hang-up. She calls back a few minutes later. The man is yelling so loudly, the woman is hard to understand. He still has the shotgun, and he says he's done with his life. She says he went down to the basement. She gives the operator her information, and he repeats, he just needs to sleep this off. 10 minutes go by, and the woman is still on the phone with the operator, and she is talking about her husband's drinking habits, threats of wanting to take his life all the time, and her bruises throughout the years from him. The operator then tells the woman to check on the husband. She agrees, but with an attitude that shows that she could be rolling her eyes. It's like the same crap every other night. Then, a shot is heard. The woman makes a strange "oh" noise, and she walks down the steps. Incoherent words. The woman then starts yelling, why, and the phone drops to the ground. The operator asks what has happened. No answer. All you can hear is the woman yelling at someone. She then picks up the phone and tells the operator that he pulled the trigger and blood is everywhere. The operator tells her to calm down and let the officers in. The husband got himself in the temple, shattering his entire skull. Next story. Paramedic here. We had a car wreck on the interstate, and we were the first on scene. Car 1 had major damage, but the occupant was physically fine. Car 2 was heavily smoking and then burst into flames. The wreck had damaged the car enough to jam all of the doors. We used fire extinguishers on the truck until they ran out. Then we even tried soaking a blanket in saline to try to get a door or window open. I got some minor burns, but it was just too hot to even get close. We ended up having to stand there listening to the blood-curdling screams and watch as the 3 occupants beat on the windows, begging for help as they burned alive. A family of 3. I still hear their screams, and I still see them struggle as I am powerless to do anything in my nightmares. I have never admitted this to anyone, but part of the reason I carry a pistol in my car is that if it is ever me, I won't have to suffer. And, Yeah, I'm gonna go to another subreddit now. Edit. Many have asked, why not break the window with the fire extinguisher? Car fires? They're effing hot, guys. We couldn't get within 10 feet of the car. Then, why not throw the extinguisher to break the window? Well, putting a pressurized metal canister inside a burning car will not cause an explosion with shrapnel, but the people in the car would not have been able to crawl out and get far away enough from the car for me to be able to reach them. Next story. I had one as a caller back when I was 10. The event wasn't all that bad, but the operator was a bit creeped out by how calm I was. My sister and dad had gone to pick up a new scanner from a store about an hour away, and I had gone out to clean up the yard because there was a storm starting, and it took me maybe 20 to 30 minutes. When I come inside, it looks a little bit like a zombie apocalypse set. Bloody handprints on the walls, doors, and blood on the door handles, bloody footprints smeared all over the place. I go through the house and eventually find my mom in her room trying to change her shirt that's now covered in blood. She has blood all down on one side of her face and is quite disoriented. I figure out that she must have had a seizure and hit her head on something. So I get her a wet face cloth for her to wipe off her face. After I do this, I go make the call to 911, explain what had happened to the best of my knowledge. I knew she had a seizure, but not what she had hit her head on, and that she seemed to be bleeding pretty badly. After that, I go and help her clean up her clothes since she was still really out of it, having actually cracked her skull when she fell. I later found out it was down the stairs while seizing, so pretty much the worst case scenario for falling downstairs. And when the paramedics arrived, they made sure she was stable, and then started checking me because the operator thought it was out of place of a 10-year-old to be so calm when reporting that there was blood everywhere, and that his mother was in this condition. Next story. A lady calls in hysterics. I spend a solid 2 minutes on the phone trying to get her to calm down enough that I can understand her, and the whole time I hear someone screaming in a language that I can't recognize in the room with her. It sounds like some fanatic speaking in tongues, but I finally get her calmed down enough to understand what she's saying. My husband was shot in the head. You've got to help him. He's talking to me, but I don't understand what he's saying. Please, 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 you've got to come help him. And you see, the husband and wife were arguing. Husband was drunk, he gets his 45 and unalived himself. The incoherent yelling I was hearing was his broken brain trying to scream, cry, ask for help. He was still alive when they got to the hospital and was taken off of life support the next morning. Next story. I am a dispatcher for an agency in the Midwest. In my first 6 months of dispatching, I had taken every kind of call, from car wrecks to stabbings and shootings to childbirth. But the call that sticks out in my mind, though, is one from a guy named Brady. I answer with the standard 911, what is your emergency? And he just kept repeating, I don't know what to do. Oh God, I don't know what to do. And at this point, I know this is going to be unpleasant. I get him calmed down and he tells me that he just came home from work and found his house ransacked. While checking out the house, he found his girlfriend in the bedroom, naked and tied to the bed. She had been SA'd. My partner sends the cavalry as I give Brady some instructions. The crappy thing was that because he lived way out in the country, he only had cell service outside of his house. He had to leave his girlfriend alone inside to get help. I stayed on the phone until help got there, which luckily was only about 10 minutes. And I'm not sure why that call stuck with me, but it did. It came in right at the end of my shift, and I've never bolted from that room so fast in my life. Next story. I took 911 calls for about a year. The most disturbing calls were as follows. A woman calling in a whisper to ask us to send her the police. Her husband was essaying their daughter, and she had finally had enough. Apparently, it had been ongoing for years. The child was 6 years old. Then, a woman called screaming that her husband had just taken his own life with a shotgun. She was, understandably, frantic, and you could hear their teenage daughter screaming and crying in the background. It was heartbreaking. And then finally, a sad/funny call. An elderly woman called that her adult son had locked himself in her bedroom and was smoking crack. She wanted the police to remove him from her home. While we were waiting for the police to arrive, I was asking her some basic questions. Is there a weapon in the house? How many people are in the house now, etc.? Then I asked, on a whim, if she knew where he had obtained the crack. That's when she got very upset and said, yes, I know where he got it from. He's smoking my crack. I can't have him up there smoking my crack. I asked numerous times, hoping that she was just confused by my question, but she was adamant that it had been her crack, and that she wanted him out of her home because he was smoking her crack. There have been other crazy calls as I worked an overnight shift, but those are the first three that spring to mind.
Okay, see, here's the thing. The son is an idiot. Everybody knows this. You don't smoke your mother's crack. Was this person not raised right? Come on, guys. Everybody in the comment section. We were taught this in school, right? I know I was. I don't smoke my mama's crack. I don't do my daddy's weed. And I don't drink my sister's Hennessy. Anyway, next story.
So, not a dispatcher, but my friend is an EMT, and he got a call from our school's security at 7 p.m. He was a student EMT with local fire department, but they were saying, "A stupid freshman has fallen down the stairs holding a bottle of alcohol. Need EMT transport immediately." Funny part was, the freshman cared more about that bottle than his body because the glass bottle made it down safely down the flight of stairs in his arms. Next story. I work for a fire department and our dispatchers are upstairs. I was working our rescue unit, which is an ambulance with a paramedic on it. We were at our local mall on a broken water pipe when I hear a bunch of police cars in the distance. Then I hear the other units get a dispatch to medical. They were told to stage for PD. Listening to the radio, 2 people went to the hospital, one with a gunshot wound. I go upstairs to ask dispatch about it, and they played us back the tape. Went something like this. 911, what's the location of the emergency?
Help, there's a naked man in my house.
Sir, where are you?
He broke in, I'm gonna shoot him.
Sir, what is your address?
My address is this, I'm gonna shoot him.
Sir, stay calm, help is on the way.
Oh, I'm gonna shoot him. Bang, 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 bang. I shot him.
And at this point, I remember thinking, holy crap, I just heard someone get shot. I'm pretty sure the naked man survived. He was high on something and was swimming in the water. The house was on the water, and he broke into the house for some reason. The guy that shot him was okay, but went to the hospital because he was shaken up. Next story. So, I'm not a 911 dispatcher, but I did get an interesting response once that rather terrified me. A few years ago, my roommate got mugged in our apartment. He got hit in the head with a baseball bat, and the muggers ran off with his wallet and his backpack. My roommate immediately began having a seizure, and there was a pretty significant amount of blood coming out of various places in his head. I was freaked the F out, to be honest. I called 911 immediately, explained that my roommate just got hit in the head with a baseball bat. He's having a seizure and there's blood everywhere. And the 911 dispatcher replied, "Oh crap." That didn't help me calm down in any way. It was a rough night for me and my roommate, but he did end up being okay.
I feel like that's one of the worst things you can hear a 911 dispatcher say in response to your emergency. Maybe it was his first day, I don't know, but saying, "Hey, we have an emergency," and bro says, "Oh crap." Oh my God. I think the only thing worse than a 911 dispatcher saying that is, "Hold please," while in the middle of an emergency. What the Oh, I can't swear on this channel, sorry. Anyway, next story.
So, I'm not a 911 call taker, but I was interviewing for the position, and they had me listen to a call before committing to the job. I will never forget it. A woman had called because her husband was in a psychotic state and had locked himself in their home with their 3 children. The woman had run to the neighbor's house to phone 911 and took the wireless phone outside so she could watch the house. She was pretty upset, for obvious reasons, and was begging the dispatcher to send someone because her husband had a gun. So she's yelling at the dispatcher, not able to give an address of where she is because she is so upset, and then suddenly, gunshots go off. I heard 3 of them, and the woman starts screaming at the top of her lungs about her children.
"Oh my God, my babies, he shot my babies."
And they stopped the recording after that, and I politely declined the job. I was barely holding it together after hearing that, and I realized I wouldn't be able to deal with that every day. Next story. I've never been a 911 dispatcher, but I do have a couple of crazy calls from my time in call centers. Working for a T-Mobile, I got a call and a woman was crying hysterically. I asked what the matter was, and she told me she was about to unalive herself and her 6-year-old son, and I will never forget her voice. It chilled me to the bone. I frantically waved over a supervisor and asked what the hell to do. He had me stay on the phone and talk to her while they called 911. I spoke to her until the police showed up, and nobody got hurt. Then, I also used to be a dispatcher for ADT, which compromised mostly of false alarms, about 90%. So I get this panic alarm at a store. Call the guy, he's a totally chipper guy and says it was a false alarm and everything was fine. Gave me the password and all was well. I asked if there was anything else I could help him with, and he said, "You can buy me breakfast," and then he left. I don't know what it was exactly, but something struck me as odd. So I went down through his notes, only to find special instructions saying if he ever says, "You can buy me breakfast, lunch, dinner," he is being held against his will and he needs help. I have no idea what happened after I sent the police, but I do know I was about 3 seconds away from effing up and taking the next call. Next story. My mom is a dispatcher, and this is hers. I don't know if anyone knows or not, but many years ago in upstate New York, there was a downburst that hit the school. It knocked down a wall at an elementary school. There were kids injured, and kids were killed as well. She took the call from 911 and dispatched units. While she was dispatching, the power to the communications center was cut by the storm, so she ran out to the mobile communications van and started dispatching from there. She said there were officers in tears on the radio, and there was counseling provided for those who needed it. For those who are interested in it, look up East Coldenham School Disaster. Next story. I was an emergency medical dispatcher for fire and EMS and also worked in the field as an EMT on an ambulance. Worst day of my life started with a light rain shower. In our country, there is the exit ramp that one interstate merges onto a second. That exit is notorious for becoming very slick after it rains, especially after a light shower because all the oils seep up but aren't washed away and just sit on the road surface. Anyway, we got a call for an MVA with a rollover and possible entrapment. My unit was very close to the scene, so we were on scene in just a few minutes, while the fire apparatus with the extrication equipment was still 10 minutes away. First thing I smelled when we got out was a very strong odor of gasoline. Turns out that the occupants were a 13-year-old boy and his mother. The kid had been able to extricate himself from the wreck, but the mother was conscious and responsive but pinned, and we had no way of getting her out. We had only been on scene for a minute or two. I was assessing the kid, and my partner was assessing the mother when the car lit up. That thing went from flicker to fully involved in seconds. All the spilt fuel. A 13-year-old, they can be quite strong in a crisis, and it was hard for me and my partner to restrain him without hurting him. One of the things burnt into my memory is the screams of the mother, yelling, "I'm burning up, God help me." We ended up carrying the kid to the unit and buttoning him up inside, while my partner was outside screaming for fire to expedite, even though I knew it was too late. Fire got on scene 5 minutes later and put out the wreck. We transported the kid to the hospital and called out of service. System status put us out for the rest of the shift. There was some counseling after that call, but like I said, worst day of my life. Next story. I wasn't the 911 dispatcher here, I was the 911 caller. It was New Year's Eve several years back and I was partying with the neighbors. I was sober, the guys were drunk, my neighbor had been fighting with his girlfriend who proceeded to threaten violence and send a gang over or something like that. But eventually, one of the guys brings a gun out. My neighbor is looking at the gun and then shoots himself in the leg. He immediately falls down and everyone panics and bolts, leaving me alone in the living room with him. I go over to him and I realize he's going to die if we don't get him help. It was literally that scene from Black Hawk Down. He'd hit his femoral artery and it was a geyser. So I called 911. I remember crouching over him, putting pressure on his leg, and begging the dispatcher to send the EMS crew in. Well, they didn't want anyone going in until the police secured the gun. And even though I told them they'd ran out with it, they wouldn't send them in yet. I remember asking them over and over, just saying, "Please send them in, the gun is gone, please, he's bleeding out." And it was the worst moment of my life. Eventually, police stormed in with M16s and held me at gunpoint until I let go of my hold on his leg, and then they cuffed me. He ended up surviving, but nearly lost his leg. If I had ran out with everyone else, he would have died. It's been 6 or 7 years and I still won't celebrate New Year's Eve. Next story. I've been thinking about becoming a dispatcher, but this kind of thing terrifies me. I used to work in an ER as an ER tech, and I saw a lot of stuff I'd rather not have seen. Most of the really depressing things aren't even the obvious ones, like deaths. You expect death. You prepare for that. But I remember one day we had a little old man, sweet as anything, in for kidney stones, and the whole time he was pleasant and cheery to everyone. We all adored him immediately. Diminutive old guy with a long gray ponytail, around 70 years old. He kept talking about how his caretaker, a middle-aged woman sitting nearby, was his whole life and he loved her and how she was his sunshine in his world, etc. Well, we came back into the room later to find her standing over him with his arm wrangled behind his back while she was yelling at him and smacking him in the face. He said it was his fault for not being attentive enough to her. She was arrested and he cried the whole time. That stuck with me. But if you want a lighter story, because this thread could use some light, there was one time a guy called the ER at 2 in the morning because he didn't know how long to microwave a burrito, and he was concerned about burning his mouth. That was a weird one. And then, now, for the craziest happy ending I've seen. One time, we got a guy in with a heart attack. Full cardiac arrest, blue in the lips, etc. We worked on him for close to an hour. We got no pulse, we pumped him full of every drug we had. I don't know what kind though, I was only a tech and I was 19 at the time. I helped with compressions along with the nurses and we defibrillated him several times, but nothing was working. The skin started going gray. Doc declared time of death. Then the wife had arrived by that point and was invited in to say her goodbyes. We expected hysterics, but she came in a daze, a weirdly peaceful look on her face, and walked over to the body of her husband. She put her hand over his heart. She leaned down and put her ear over his heart listening. Then she put her mouth over his heart and just said, "Please come back." And I crap you not. I could crap you, but I'm really truly not crapping you right now. There it was. We'd neglected to disconnect the monitor in the frenzy. Pulse came right back up on my screen. We immediately get back to work again while she calmly backed out of the room. The guy was fine and went home from ICU in relatively good shape. Stuff like that made the bad stuff more palatable. Humans are amazing things.
So I am so happy and pleased that OP decided to inject some positivity into this video in that particular thread, because Lord knows we needed it. That's why I always try to, make things lighter or happier when doing these harder type of videos. It's not me being flippant, especially at the end, I just don't want to send anyone on their way in a very depressive note. That's why I always say bye-bye at the end of the video. But anyway, next story.
So, this isn't any call in particular, as I'd like to think I'm pretty good at not letting my job get to me. But the scream of a mother who just had it click in their mind that their child is dead is something I will never push out of my mind for good. We can tell them that their child is dead, but it could be anywhere from a few seconds to a few days before it really sinks in. And when it does, though, man. Next story. I was a caller a year ago. My mom had told me to make sure to get to bed on time, which was a bit unusual, but she said she was going to bed early. Cue me walking by her bedroom door to see her slumped over, face down, half on the bed. I was a bit worried, thinking, must be drunk, and tried to get her up so she could sleep it off. She wouldn't respond, though. It was horrifying. Not drunk, but I knew something was legitimately wrong with her. I don't remember exactly what happened after that, but I do know when I looked around to see if she'd maybe mixed sleeping medicine with beer, and I found a note. I found a note from my mom telling me that she loved me and to be good. And that's when I ran to the phone and I called 911. But I was wrestled by my sister, who was screaming, "Don't call 911, they will take us away, they will take us away." We lived with Grandma and Mom at the time, but I called and cried and hoped to God they would show up soon. It was terrifying. My mom tried to take her own life with sleeping pills. It was horrible. I was screaming, crying into the phone, asking them to hurry. There was something wrong with my mom, and I found an empty bottle of sleeping pills. But she's okay now. She spent a week in a rehab clinic, something to do with narcotics, I think. Still an alcoholic, but she's alive. Alcoholic and doesn't have priorities straight, but she's better now, I hope. Next story. When I was a toddler, my mom worked for our local PD as a dispatcher. There was a family who was well known within the department for fake emergencies, yada yada yada. One day, my mom takes a call. It's the mother of this family, saying her son was kidnapped. Normally, she would have sent a cruiser out there. Eventually, as was customary with this family and their emergencies, but something told her to send a car out there ASAP. And it turns out the boy, who was not much older than I was at the time, was indeed kidnapped. They found him murdered in the woods a short while later. It's one of the few murders to ever happen in our city, and it's the reason my mom left the job shortly after. She wanted to have as much time as possible with my newborn brother and I, in case something awful ever happened to us. Next story. This is where I wish my mother had read it. She's been a dispatcher at least 3 locations: police, fire, and fire. Police, though, has got to be the best. I don't recall all of her stories, but this is what shoots out for me. Back in the 90s, and it still happens now, they had a lot of crazies call, and they called frequently. For no reason, really, either to scream nonsense or say nonsense. When it's that frequent, they try to calm the situation over the phone. One thing I know that they'll do is they'll tell them they're hanging up 3 times before doing so, asking if there is an emergency. One day, my mother gets a call. A woman tells her that there's robot lasers coming in from her window. My mother suggests putting tinfoil up, knowing well the woman isn't in an emergency, but suffers from some sort of mental illness. And she does it, comes back on the line, and she tells her it worked. Next story. As a part of job training, I had to sit with and listen to a 911 call in Boulder, Colorado for a morning. Around 9 a.m., multiple dispatchers started receiving phone calls, enough for me to notice something was happening. On the line, I heard a woman in near hysterics explaining to me that she was seeing from her car, and I realized that the other dispatchers were getting similar calls from the witnesses. It turned out that a bunch of geese had started crossing the street at a busy downtown intersection, and as these geese moved slowly across the street, drivers were becoming more and more distressed. At some point, a man had exited his car and charged the geese, kicking and stomping and screaming at them. The woman on the 911 call was extremely disturbed and wanted the man immediately arrested. Next story. Many years ago, I worked as a British telecom operator, taking customer service calls and also routing 999 calls to the emergency services. There are 2 calls that I remember. For the first one, I answer the phone and I say to them, "Emergency, which service?" And a woman's voice comes on, and she says, "And you kept me here against my will? Assaulted me, threatened me?" Then a man's voice nearby says, "Shut up, keep your hands off that effing phone." So I quietly say, "Shall I connect you to the police?" No reply. I did connect to the police and explained that she hadn't spoken directly to me. She must have lifted the handset, dialed 999, and then put it down carefully so that the line stayed open without it being obvious. And I listened in, as I was supposed to in non-routine calls, and she humored him and kept him talking until police arrived and knocked on the door a few minutes later. Then another story. Emergency, which service? And I hear crying. We've just got back from my grand's funeral. Everyone on our street was there. Everything is gone, even the curtains, even the carpets. They must have known where we'd all be. Then, many years later, I was back in a call center working for a credit card company. A woman called one of my colleagues and authorized her husband to speak on her behalf. It sounded like she didn't speak much English. The husband came on the line, asked for the balance, and then as soon as my friend told him, he heard the police being dropped. Shouts, sounds of a fight, cries of fear and pain. He called the police. Next story. My cousin is an EMT, and he shared his worst story a while back. Husband came home to visit his 7-year-old son crying and bleeding before his mother, who was screaming at him and holding a bat. "You worthless effer, you B-word, you loser!" Husband drops his bag and sprints between his wife and child. He tries to ask what's going on, what's wrong, put the bat down, and she just responds, "Out of the way, Gary. This little scumbag is gonna get what's coming to him." He refuses, and she swings. She hits him in the head, and he falls to the side, blood pouring from the side of his head, only semi-conscious. She advances on the kid, and the husband sees. He tackles his kid to hide/shield him, and she says, "Get off of him, Gary. He deserves what he deserves," and hits him in his side. He just pleads, "No, stop, he's our son, please stop, no, don't hurt our son." And she tries to hit the son, but can't get a solid hit because he's mostly blocked by the father. The father refuses to get off, and she isn't strong enough to physically lift him off. She eventually gives up on hitting his son and just goes to town on the father's head. The father didn't survive, but his son lived. The woman pleaded insanity or something and ended up getting like 20 years. Next story. I have a few. As call takers, there are constantly bad calls, but you learn to leave them at work and you clear your head most of the time. Even after almost 15 years, some of them still get to me. Here are some of the ones that, for whatever reason, stand out most in my mind. First, female calls screaming on the phone. I get her calmed down and start trying to determine what's going on. Turns out her husband was in a mobile home in her backyard and it had exploded, with him in it. At this point, she didn't know if her son was in the mobile home with her husband or not. I had her check her son's bedroom to confirm he was okay. Thankfully, he was sound asleep in his bed. She asked me to stay on the line even after the police, fire, and paramedics were on scene because she felt more comfortable while I was talking to her. I still get teary-eyed when I hear the call. We use it for training and calming techniques. Then, an elderly lady calls in because her husband is not conscious, not breathing. I try to walk her through CPR, but she was hard of hearing, and no matter how hard I tried, she couldn't hear me giving her CPR instructions. He was already deceased, but it's sad because I wanted to help her feel like she had tried. Then, driver calls in because she's just hit a mother and 2 children who were jaywalking on a busy dark road. The driver was hysterical, as anyone would be, and one of the boys was already deceased, but the officer still attempted CPR because it was a child, and those are always the hardest ones to handle. Next one. Man calls in to report that someone shot themselves. I get through the beginning steps and start talking him through CPR. At this point, the man informs me that the patient doesn't have a face and becomes hysterical again. Next one, a little boy fell downstairs and had impaled himself on a statue at the bottom. Caller advised that she could see his insides and bones sticking out. Then, one time a guy calls in because he has a headache. I'm trying to confront him as he was very upset, and for some reason I stayed on the line, which is not typical with minor-type medical calls, but I spoke with him until the EMS knocked on his door and I disconnected at that point. Apparently, when he stood up, the blood flow changed or something and he passed away. The paramedics had to force entry, but it was too late. It happened that quickly. But yeah, these are just the ones I haven't been able to brush out of my head. This job is not easy, but I do love it. There are goods and bads, but I work with amazing people. I get to help people, and I go into work every day without knowing what the day will bring. I've worked many different jobs, but nothing beats this one. The good moments, even if not as often as the bad, can be so amazing that it makes it all worthwhile. Next story. I made a throwaway account just for this. My best friend was a dispatcher. After 2 years of service, he received a call half an hour before his shift was over. It was from a 13-year-old boy crying, telling him that his father was being violent and to please come help. He could hear the father screaming on the phone and what sounded like a young girl crying too. He then told him that his dad was beating his 9-year-old sister and there was blood everywhere. He obviously sent the police and stayed on the phone with the boy. The boy then told him that he had taken his dad's gun when he started to get angry. He then started talking to his father, telling him to get away, and all my friend heard was a gunshot, and then the kid dropped the phone. He later found out that the kids were being abused ever since their mother died, 6 months ago or something. Turned out he was also essaying his daughter. The kid shot him in the chest, and the dad died. I don't know from there, but I hope they find a good foster home. My friend had extreme PTSD after that one. Next story. I wasn't a dispatcher, but I took calls for mental health nurses and doctors. People would ring up expecting their nurse or the doctor to answer, and I would have to explain to them that I was their out-of-hours service, and for them to leave a message with me, and I would page on their problem and get somebody to call them back. So many people, though, called up on the verge of wanting to take their own life, were confused about the situation, and then blamed me for their state of mind. Get me my effing doctor, or I'll take my life and it'll be all your fault, idiot. It was something that I heard quite often, but there was not much I could do but try and calm them down. But I wasn't given training for these weird situations that I was put in. I was only 16 or 17 at the time. Next story. Back when I did child protective social work, I listened into the 911 call of when a father had shoved a baby wipe down his 3-month-old son's throat. The child was suffocating to death. The mother called 911, but the child died. The father went to jail, and I'll never forget hearing that tape, though, as long as I live. I met one of the EMTs who responded to that call, and he broke down and cried in my office. Now, in my IT career, I support our 911 dispatch center, and I don't know how those men and women answer phone calls like that. Next story. My mom, she's a dispatcher, and she told me this one story about this one call. It was a drug bust, and they found a ton of pot and other crap in the house. For some reason, the owners had some massive snakes and an alligator in a small suburban home. And the owners, they thought it would be a good idea to set fire to the house and pot and burn a few of the snakes and the alligators inside with it. It's not so disturbing as it was bizarre. Next story. Not me, but my brother used to be a dispatcher. One time, a man called in, and my brother could tell that he was in pain. My brother calmly asked what his emergency was, if he was okay, the usual stuff. Then, in the most normal voice you can imagine, the guy says, I have a cucumber stuck in my a-hole. My brother asked if he needed an ambulance, in which he replied, well, no, I could use some advice though. And maybe it's just a thing for the state I live in, but here the dispatchers are technically not supposed to give personal advice. So my brother said, well, I can't give you much advice, but the ambulance is still an option. And the guy simply replies, nah, I'll figure it out, and then hung up the phone. Dude, just get a butt plug. Just get a butt plug, dude. Just get a dildo. Can I say that on this channel? Just get a butt plug. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, next story. So, I only did it for 4 years, but definitely heard enough. Oddly, the one that bothered me the most wasn't very gory, it was just sad. A lady called from a birthday party, saying a little 6-year-old girl was choking. You could hear lots of little kids and party music in the background. The lady was on the phone with me until medics arrived, and during that time, the desperation in her voice was just heart-wrenching. They took a few minutes to get there, and the little 6-year-old was just turning more and more blue, despite all efforts to dislodge the food. It was just so sad to me. They saw her happy 1 second, and saw her slowly pass out the next, then pass away. They weren't able to revive her, just a little girl at a party, and she never went home. Then, another one was when a man called and asked for Dr. Smith, or something like that. I was confused and I asked him if he needed emergency medical attention, and he said no, that he just needed to schedule an appointment. I told him this was 911, an emergency line, and to call his doctor back. Then he said, well, on the answering machine, it says if you're reaching this message after hours, to call 911. I guess he thought 911 was the after hours number to contact his doctor. Cute old little man, but just not so bright. I wish now I would have kept a notebook to write down the most interesting calls that I had. I missed that job. Next story. The one tape I heard and effing hate. My sister had a boyfriend whose parents were stabbed. As it turns out, the stepdaughter had talked her boyfriend into killing the parents because they didn't approve of their relationship. The tape is of their brother, a nurse, frantically trying to save the father. It's effing awful.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was the last story. We're heading towards the end here, and this was, one of the darker videos, but we do that sometimes on this channel because people like that stuff. If nothing else, at least out of morbid curiosity, general curiosity, or maybe just to paint a new perspective or learn something, or at least gain some appreciation for the people in your life and tell them that you love them. Because you never know when they might end up in one of these scenarios, unfortunately so. So, just keep the people you love close. Nothing new, nothing fancy, but love is a very important thing to have in your life. And so is Undersparked. But anyway, guys, we're at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting. Have a really good day. And say it with me now. Bye-bye.